one of the states that you mentioned, Louisiana, so you've got this case now pending at the Supreme Court in which Louisiana passed a law that said basically doctors have to have local admitting privileges. And, I thought you had already won this a few years ago, Nancy. In Texas, it's basically the same law as far as I can tell.
It is identical to the Texas law, not similar, it's identical.
It's identical. And if the law goes into effect, there'll be one doctor to perform abortions for the whole state or something like that. Is that right?
That's right. There would be just one clinic left to serve the 1 million women in the state of Louisiana of reproductive age at just one clinic. But what Louisiana is trying to do now, we just sued them, this week, is they're trying to, in fact, shut down the clinics with this bogus, using of the COVID crisis before the Supreme Court ever issues its ruling. We just argued this on March the 4th. And, there was a huge rally outside the Supreme Court that day with supporters of abortion rights. And they're trying to just take that decision away from the Supreme Court by doing this.
And how did the argument go in March? This was like right before the apocalypse really started in this country. It was like one of the very last things the Supreme Court did in public. How was that argument?
Exactly. Well, I think that Julie Rickman from the Center for Reproductive Rights, who argued it, did, I think, a brilliant argument. And that's what many of the Twitter feeds said. And it made it really clear that this is the same case they decided 4 years ago, that they're trying to use this admitting privileges law to shut down the clinics. It's not medically justified, and it would have this horrific effect. So I think it became really clear in the oral argument, there's no medical basis for what Louisiana is doing. And we were so lucky that, there were thousands of people in front of the courthouse. We took busloads down from New York, and thank goodness, this was right before, literally, we shut our office the next week, and we did not have any, COVID spreading through that, and we're really thankful for that.
Yeah. And Matt, you and I did something the week before that was really quite cool. We released a record in part about this case and about reproductive justice more generally. This is a project you've really been doing for a number of years. Can you talk a little about that project?
Brandon Reed and I, who is the Nationals manager and an old friend, that it was 2 days after Trump won, we got on the phone and we're like, well, what do we do? And we talked a lot about things, and he was the one who jokingly said, "What about a 7 inches series? For women's reproductive rights, basically."
I got it.
And he said something like, I don't think 7 inches for Planned Parenthood is maybe such a great name. And I was like, actually, that's a great name. It just started that way, and then we reached out to just like friends we know and comedians and poets and writers, and we just, the intention was to obviously bring support and attention. People understand kind of what Planned Parenthood does and how many people support it and why. And the idea was to bring in people from all over. Margaret Atwood's on it, Zach Galifianakis is on it, Sarah Silverman, lots of musicians and bands, and there are doctors on it. So the idea was that like a good argument, just like a good song should be preserved and listened to over and over again. A captivating argument, whatever it is, of an idea. And so it's a collection of that. It's not just music. It's all kinds of things. And the thing we did just with you specifically, it was the best argument made in 3 minutes. The idea was like, how can you make a good argument for Planned Parenthood in 3 minutes, the length of a pop song?
So we've got this presidential election coming up, and a lot of people think Roe versus Wade is on the table in the election. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court, 5 currently appointed by Republican presidents, 4 by Democratic ones. And I'm not one who really thinks that the president who nominates them necessarily controls things. After all, it was Republican appointed nominees like Anthony Kennedy and David Souter and Sandra Day O'Connor who basically kept Roe versus Wade alive. So this isn't always true, but the Republican Party in recent years has basically said their platform is to overturn Roe versus Wade. Which strikes me as a job for the judiciary, not for presidents, but nonetheless, that's what they've been saying and doing. So, Nancy, what do you see these issues? Is Roe really at stake in 2020? And what happens if Roe is at stake? What are the stakes here? So
I do think that Roe versus Wade is at stake. The president has been very clear about what he's looking for in the justices that he's appointing. I mean, I will say, like Neal, you've had this experience. I mean, we win cases before, judges appointed by Republicans, as well as judges appointed by Democrats, judges elected in state court, as well as appointed in federal court. And so, there is something to the actual judicial process that is meaningful. But nevertheless, there are some, judges that get appointed who are quite ideological. So it is on the line. I mean, this argument that we just had on March 4th, although it doesn't put Roe squarely there, is a potential for the court to weaken the standard, which would be problematic because we already see the floodgates opening. I mean, there have been hundreds and hundreds of laws passed since, 2010, and they just keep coming. And so the concern is that any weakening at all will not only risk reversing Roe versus Wade, but like the moment we have right now during the COVID crisis where, the states are those states that we talked about are trying to ban abortion without ever having touched Roe versus Wade by just using a pretextual reason. So it's a great concern, and everyone is getting ready for what to do if that would happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. It just, it seems to me like if Roe is overturned, there'll be some states in which, abortion will be safe and legal. And, New York and Illinois, presumably, and states like that. But others, like the ones you're fighting, Louisiana and Texas, where they'll do everything they can to make it illegal and a crime. And, for women in those states, they're just they're going to have to travel to some other state in order to get access to these services. And boy, that is going to be such an economic disparity at a time when we can't really afford any economic disparities in healthcare. And I'm tremendously worried about that. And, I don't.
Absolutely. And if you go to the Center for Reproductive Rights has tracked which states we think would immediately or very shortly after make sure that abortion was illegal. And on our website, reproductiverights.org, you can see what if Roe fell. And you can go to your state and see what would happen and likely happen. Because some states, as you know, Neal, have already put in laws saying that, if Roe is overturned, we're going to have a trigger law that springs into effect and abortion is going to be illegal again. So it is quite troubling. And to realize, as you said, that women who get abortions are, primarily women of all walks of life, but also falls heaviness on women who are low income and have harder time accessing health care generally.
But I have a question though about Roe v. Wade and how, like, I think so many people are terrified, Nancy, about what if Roe v. Wade is overturned, but isn't like Roe v. Wade isn't just standing by itself is protecting the right to safe and legal abortion. It goes back to personal liberties, right? And so my question is, like, questions of civil personal liberties that have existed 50 years before Roe v. Wade was even passed, like the privacy and right to personal privacy and things in the bedroom, stuff like that. I'm just like, I don't understand. Tell me a little bit about like how like Roe v. Wade is based on something more than just that one case. It goes back to the 14th Amendment, right?
Matt, that was just a wonderful explanation of constitutional law. So thank you. Yes, what people don't tend to realize, because we focus so much on this one case, is that Roe versus Wade is in the middle of literally a century of constitutional law that goes back to the 1920s when the cases come to the court were about, can you decide to educate your children by teaching them foreign languages, or can states bar that? Or sending them to parochial schools was a big issue that went up to the court. And the court said, no, we live in a free society, and it is for parents to be able to direct their children that way. Questions about who you marry. Can you marry someone of another race? Can you marry someone a later case of the same sex? And all of these questions about family formation, who we love, who we marry, who's in our household, and decisions about our reproductive health care are all part of a continuum. So people have to understand what's at stake here is that fundamental concept of personal liberty, that there is, as the Supreme Court said, there is a zone of personal autonomy which the government cannot enter. And that is what we should value so highly as free people in a free society.
Yeah, and Nancy, I would add to that, that Roe versus Wade is really built on the bedrock of a decision 8 or so years before in Griswold versus Connecticut, which is about access. Connecticut had a law banning access to contraception. They said it was a crime. And And the Supreme Court struck that down, saying, as Matt's talking about, personal liberty. And so if the court goes back on Roe with one hand, they can go back on this other stuff with the other, and we could be living in a very, very different society. And so I think that's why the work both of you are doing is so tremendously important.